They got it done 46 years later. In 1988, the United States Congress sent formal letters of apology to every surviving person who had been forced from their home by their own government in 1942. $20,000 each. A letter, a check, an apology. That is where this story ends. But it begins on February 19th, 1942. A pen hovers. One signature. And 120,000 people will spend the next 3 years learning what their country actually thought of them. San Francisco, a family home, February 1942. A man named Dave Tatsuno is sitting at the kitchen table. He has lived in San Francisco his entire life. His children were born here. His business is here. He has never been to Japan. He is reading the newspaper. The headline says the president has signed an executive order. He sets the paper down. He looks at the walls of his house. He thinks, I wonder how much time we have. The answer is 48 hours. In 48 hours, General John DeWitt of the Western Defense Command will issue Public Proclamation No. 4. Every person of Japanese ancestry on the West Coast must report to an assembly center. Bring only what you can carry. Everything else must be sold or left behind. Dave Tatsuno closes the newspaper. He does not stand up for a long moment. He thinks, what do you take when you have 48 hours? December 7th, 1941, had changed everything. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. 2,400 Americans died in 2 hours. The country went to war the next morning. But in the weeks that followed, a different pressure was building. 127,000 people of Japanese ancestry lived on the west coast of the United States. 2/3 of them were American citizens. Many had never set foot in Japan. Some of their families had been in California for 3 generations. Public opinion turned fast. Newspapers printed columns calling for action. One prominent journalist wrote that the only reason Japanese Americans had not yet been caught plotting sabotage was that they were waiting for the right moment to strike. There was no evidence for this. The FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, did not believe it. The Attorney General, Francis Biddle, did not believe it. But the military believed it, or said it did, and the military had the ear of the president. Therefore, on February 19th, 1942, Executive Order 9066 was signed. It did not name Japanese Americans. It authorized military commanders to exclude civilians from any area they deemed a military zone, but everyone knew who it meant. The notices went up on telephone poles, in post offices, on the walls of shops and community centers. Instructions to all persons of Japanese ancestry. Report to the designated assembly point. Bring bedding, linens, toilet articles, extra clothing, sufficient cutlery. Do not bring pets. Do not bring cameras or radios. A family with a house, a business, a farm, a car had 48 hours to reduce their life to what they could carry. The property loss was later estimated at $1.3 billion. That figure is in 1942 dollars. In current terms, the number is many times larger. Farms were sold in days for fractions of their value. Businesses handed over. Bank accounts frozen. Insurance policies canceled. Homes left to whatever neighbors or strangers would take them. Some families buried their valuables in the backyard before they left. Some never came back to find them. A racetrack in Southern California, spring 1942. Families arrive with their bundles. They are directed to stables. The horse stalls have been converted to living quarters. The dirt floors have not been fully cleaned. The smell is still there. An entire family sleeps in a space built for one horse. This is not a temporary exception. This is the first of many months. The more permanent camps come later. Heart Mountain in Wyoming, Tule Lake in California, Manzana, Topaz, 10 sites across 6 western states and Arkansas. Bare wooden barracks, tar paper on the walls, no insulation. The Wyoming winter comes through every crack. A man named Fred Korematsu refused to go. He was a 23-year-old welder born in Oakland, California. He had tried to enlist after Pearl Harbor and been rejected. When the evacuation order came, he stayed. He altered his draft card. He changed his name. On May 30th, 1942, the FBI arrested him for failure to report to a relocation center. He decided to fight. The American Civil Liberties Union took his case. He was convicted in federal court in San Francisco, given 5 years probation, sent to an assembly center anyway. His attorneys appealed. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court. On December 18th, 1944, the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 that the detention was a military necessity and not based on race. 3 justices dissented. Justice Frank Murphy wrote in his dissent that the exclusion order fell into the ugly abyss of racism. He compared it to the abhorrent treatment of minorities by the dictatorial tyrannies which this nation is now pledged to destroy. The majority ruled against Korematsu, but the dissent stayed in the record, and the record would matter. Inside the camps, something unexpected happened. The people who had been removed from their communities, stripped of their property, placed behind fences, did not stop being American. More than 33,000 Japanese Americans served in the United States military during World War II. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team, composed almost entirely of Japanese Americans, became one of the most decorated units in the history of the American military. They fought in Italy, in France, in Germany. They fought for a country that had imprisoned their parents. One veteran described going home on leave. He took the train back to California. He arrived in a uniform, covered in combat decorations. He sat in a diner. The waitress told him they did not serve Japanese people. He sat there for a moment. Then he stood up and left. He did not say anything. He just left. The camps closed in January 1945. The people came home. Many came home to nothing. Farms had been taken over. Houses were sold. Businesses were gone. Some communities had organized against the return of their former neighbors. One town in Oregon removed the names of Japanese American soldiers from its war memorial while those soldiers were still fighting overseas. The returning families rebuilt. Many of them never talked about what had happened, not to their children, not to their grandchildren, but the record existed. And in the 1970s and 80s, the children and grandchildren of the internment generation began to push for what they called redress. They wanted the government to acknowledge what had been done. In 1980, Congress established the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians. The commission held hearings. Surviving internees testified. They described the assembly centers, the horse stalls, the tar, paper barracks, the years behind wire, the return to nothing. The commission's report was published in 1982. It concluded that the incarceration had not been a military necessity. It concluded that the decision had been driven by racial prejudice, wartime hysteria, and a failure of political leadership, not by evidence of espionage, not by a credible threat, by fear, and by race. In 1988, Congress passed the Civil Liberties Act. President Ronald Reagan signed it. The law acknowledged the injustice of the incarceration. It apologized for it. It provided $20,000 to each surviving internee. Approximately 82,000 people received payments. The total was $1.6 billion. The formal apology was written into law. In 1998, Fred Korematsu received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Bill Clinton. In 2011, the Justice Department filed a legal brief, acknowledging that its predecessor had presented false information to the Supreme Court in the original Korematsu case. In 2018, the Supreme Court formally overruled the 1944 Korematsu decision in a case called Trump v. Hawaii. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote the opinion. He stated that Korematsu was gravely wrong the day it was decided. He stated that it has no place in law under the Constitution. 74 years after Fred Korematsu sat in a San Francisco jail for the crime of being present in the state where he was born, the Supreme Court said he had been right. Dave Tatsuno came back from the camps after the war. He had brought a camera with him despite the rules against it. He filmed what he saw inside the camps. The footage survived. It is in the National Archives. It is the only known footage filmed from inside a Japanese-American internment camp during World War II. He went back to San Francisco. He rebuilt. He never stopped being American because he had always been American. The government finally said so in 1988. A letter, a check, an apology. 46 years after the pen paused above the order that told 120,000 people that their country had decided they did not belong here. They belonged here. They had always belonged here. And now the law says so. The order that Roosevelt signed in February 1942 is preserved in the National Archives in Washington. It is available to the public. You can look at it. It is a single page, typed, signed at the bottom. The language is dry and bureaucratic. It authorizes the Secretary of War to designate military areas from which any or all persons may be excluded. It does not say Japanese Americans. It does not need to. Everyone knew. 73 years after it was signed, the Obama administration designated the sites of the internment camps as national monuments and historic places. Manzanar National Historic Site in California, Minidoka National Historic Site in Idaho, Honolulu National Monument in Hawaii. The places where 120,000 people were held are now protected by the same federal government that ordered them confined. The wire is gone. The barracks are mostly gone. But the land is there, and the record is there, and the lesson is there for anyone who wants to learn it. A government under pressure can move very fast. 48 hours, a notice on a telephone pole, and 120,000 people pack what they can carry. The question that the Civil Liberties Act of 1988 does not fully answer is the question that Justice Murphy asked in his dissent in 1944. He asked whether a military order based not on individual evidence, but on the fact of ancestry alone, could ever be consistent with the Constitution. The Supreme Court said no in 2018. It took 74 years to say it. The families who lost their farms and their businesses and their savings in 1942 did not get those back. The $20,000 was an acknowledgement. It was not restoration, but it was something. It was the country looking at what it had done and saying, on the record, with the force of law, that it had been wrong. That matters. Not because it undoes anything, but because a country that can look at its own history and say we were wrong is a country that can learn. The pen paused in February 1942. One signature, 46 years of consequences, and then a law that said it should never have been signed. They belonged here. They always had,